everybody. We've got a couple of great guests today that are two experts in the field of data marketing, data compliance, consent, all these hot button topics that are hugely important in so many industries, becoming bigger by the day. And we've got two companies that are share a philosophy and a mission, and we want to talk about what they're seeing in the marketplace and kind of how they came together and where they see things are headed. So we've got Dan Scudder and Timur Yarnall. I'm gonna let you guys both introduce yourselves. Timur, let's start with you. Give us a little bit about who you are, your background, and then let's get into the concept of Neutronian and why you thought it was time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Timur Yarnall, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Neutronian, and this is my fourth time as a co-founder. So I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship and just addicted to entrepreneurship. And I think generally the positive things that it can do in all aspects, for the ecosystems we're working on, what it is for employees and people involved in the business. So I'm just passionate entrepreneur in that. And for Neutronian, specifically, and my co-founder and CTO, Tom DeGrazia, has great background in cloud computing and otherwise. So, we could have gone in a lot of directions, but for Neutronian, we think we have a chance here to have a very positive impact on the MarTech ecosystem. And the idea behind the company is that we've built a SaaS platform that ingests data and then delivers the equivalent of a credit score for marketing tech data, and covers everything from compliance to performance to data processing, security, et cetera. So we think it's a long overdue need, and we're excited to have launched the company and to fill it, and excited to be partnering with Dan and Highland Math.
So it's probably important to note, Timur, that you're not, because I think people hear some of the words you say and assume you sell data or use it you're a broker or you're an ad company. You really your aspiration is to be a real neutral party that is an arbiter, not somebody who's involved in transactions or has a side in either case,
right.
Correct?
Right. That's exactly right. So Neutronian is a fairly geeky name. We're proud of our geekiness, and it is supposed to mean neutral, neutral and independent. And we are focused on measurement of data quality. So we're not selling data, and we're not, taking data ourselves and using it. We're literally measuring and scoring the quality of data, and our definition of quality, we think, is very expansive. That's exactly right.
And then Dan, give us a little bit about your background and what Highland Math's all about, and maybe how you guys might intersect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike and Timur for having me on. So my background, I'm currently CEO and co-founder of Highland Math. We've been doing this for about 2 years, and our business is a data monetization as a service business. So what we do is we help companies of all types who often create interesting data as a byproduct of their core business offering. So it could be a publisher, a retailer, a financial services firm. We help them take raw data and package it into data products. And those data products often materialize themselves as audiences, for example, in the marketing ecosystem, or insights for financial services or healthcare, but really helping companies build interesting data products. Like Timur, I like entrepreneurship. Prior to this, I was a co-founder at LiveRamp, spent many years there, ran their data platform and data division prior to leaving and starting this current company. And obviously through that experience, got a lot of deep knowledge about the ad tech and data ecosystem, and that's translated well into what we're doing at Highland Math. It's nice to be working with Neutronian, because what they're able to do is, with the data products that we create and the process that we follow to create some of these data products, they can actually validate and help ensure that the data products are high quality when they're brought to market.
So Dan, you kind of touched on this, but if we can maybe probe into that a little bit more, if you're in the digital marketing, MarTech industry or media, and you've been following the last couple of years, you might assume that, okay, every company has like 5 data scientists they bought in, they've hired all these teams, or if they want to extract more value out of their data, they can surely just plug into a couple of tools and make that happen. But that's obviously not the case, or what you've encountered.
Yeah, there's sort of like the top of the pyramid, the biggest brands, biggest retailers. They certainly can attract top tier data talent and afford to stand up these large internal teams that can sort of wrangle data. But you quickly get to a group of marketers below that in terms of spend size who don't have the internal data science capabilities. They're not necessarily able to attract PhDs out of the top data science programs to come join them. So they actually need a lot of help as more and more data becomes available in these DMPs and marketplaces. How do they use data more effectively? How do they put their data to work for them? And so that's really part of our vision, is helping these companies who don't have the internal data chops. And
I imagine it's the same with media, like, you know, a Warner Media or an NBC Universal probably has a whole huge team that tries to make money, make tons of money off all their audience data and their insights, but the average digital publisher probably doesn't have that.
Exactly. I'd say it's even less on the media side, whereas you know, finding data competencies and the data science capabilities, you'll see a lot less of them on the media side.
Right. And then do you guys go way back? Do you know each other from the industry, or have you just come together recently?
I would say, Timur, we met in the last year, introduced through some industry folks. I think we may have crossed paths over the years while he was at ComScore and some of his other past roles, and I was at LiveRamp. But yeah, it was really in the last year that we sort of got to know each other and aligned on the common missions and sort of you know, ways we can work together to improve the data ecosystem.
Yeah, I would say it's a great example of, you know, shared philosophical background, and I do think that there's a fairly rapidly forming ecosystem of companies like Highland and Neutronian that are focused on quality in all its aspects, and it's a group that sees that this is going to be beneficial and much needed for MarTech. And so I think Dan and I synced on that pretty fast.
So let's go back to like maybe try and figure out where that ecosystem was coming from, why. So if you can go back. It's hard to do right now in these crazy times, but let's go back to beginning of the year. What pre-COVID explosion, the talk at that time was privacy laws are getting stricter. Consumers are more wary of getting tracked. They just was like, they've heard a lot of data breaches. You had CCPA coming. I would hear things from like, oh, no brands are going to use third-party data at all anymore. That's over. Like, what was the climate like at that time? Am I assessing it right? And then we can get into like what's changed since. And that's for both of you guys.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So kind of turning into the new year of 2020, the big talk was third-party cookies going away. So that's going to put more demands on, you know, the use of first-party data for brands, and then third-party data under pressure from CCPA and what's that going to do to the data industry. I think a lot of what started happening has continued through COVID, but I think what you're seeing more of is actually people who are saying, hey, we actually need data more than ever. And whether it's third-party data or first-party data or second-party data sharing, data can actually be very valuable because it drives more accountable media spend. It allows everything to be measured and more effective. And so the pressure on budgets that COVID has caused has actually been a sort of a boon for the use of data in the marketing industry.
Yep, I think that it has. It does feel like several lifetimes ago, at the beginning of the year. But I think, in addition to what you mentioned, Mike, in terms of people, the buyers looking to move away from first-party data, and the idea that the accepted wisdom now on the street is that all third-party data is kind of bad. I think Dan and I philosophically agree that, well, some of that is much deserved because there have been lots of issues with data processing. I think it comes from, there is a skepticism on the buy side that is maybe well-deserved. Now, everything, I think we also have to say that everything is evaluated kind of purely on scale, and there hasn't been much of a metric around quality. And I think one of the areas where we philosophically align the most is that dialogue around first party versus third party, it's almost a bit of a false premise because every data set needs to be modeled to a certain extent. And one of the biggest problems with the perception of third party data now is that buyers are aware that some vendors are literally throwing spaghetti at the wall and taking a small data set and expanding it massively with no real statistical reason to do so. And that's where some of the skepticism has come in. But every first-party data set also needs to be complemented with additional qualities. And so there's tons of work to do on first-party data as well. And that's, I think, a key area of value here, where we're talking about bringing transparency and bringing some dialogue and framework to modeling methods. And my perception is that Dan and his team are approaching it the right way, and we want to pull additional partners into looking at that.
It's interesting you brought up the first-party data thing, because there was, you're right, in the last, go back six months ago, there was a fervor for first-party data is going to rule. Every company, whether they're a brand or a media company, wanted to become a direct-to-consumer company as fast as possible and build up their own database. That was going to be the way forward. But I wonder that I'm sure that has limitations and challenges, as well as it's probably, there's probably a limited set of companies that can get it, can build a large set of data that's useful on their own. Do you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think everyone is trying to build those first-party databases, but it's going to be varying degrees of success. I mean, if you're in the pharmaceutical business, you have very little consumer data because you're sort of in the background doing research and everything is sold through pharmacies. So sort of your ability to collect consumer data is going to be a lot harder than, say, a financial services firm where every single customer registers for an account and you have their information. And so third-party data definitely still has value along the chain of needs of these marketers. And to say data is going away is just not, it's not going to happen. Marketers need efficient media spending, and they need to be able to measure their media spending, and data is the sort of lubricant for all of that.
Timur, were you seeing, there must be examples of, before there was a real way to kind of gauge who's who, there must have been some real quality data companies out there that were just not getting enough deals, or being pushed aside often, that had a lot of valuable information and insights that brands just weren't tapping into. Were you seeing that?
We're absolutely seeing that. I think that the thing we're pointing to here, as well as on top, with what Dan was saying, I think that the problems with first party versus third party and the modeling methodology behind it, the quality players, there's quality players that have not been allowed to stand out, and I would say I think there's actually a ton of really good data that is sitting on the sidelines right now because there is no framework for quality that will properly reward somebody for coming into the market. I think that the market can be fairly described in a number of analogies. One good analogy might be it's like the 1920s in the stock market right now, where there was really no audit mechanism. So a buyer had no idea if a company financials were true, or were they faking their books. Another very good analogy, very relevant today, is for what a high quality data provider can experience, is this concept of the market for lemons. And the lemon theory is an economic theory that was first quoted in the 1970s around the market for automobiles, and it turned into a Nobel Prize winning economic theory, where at the time there was very little information about car quality. And as you remember, there was a high record of traffic accidents. And so buyers didn't know, and they would end up only paying a price kind of in between the middle of what high quality and low quality really was. And that effect ended up rewarding all the low quality players for staying in the market, because they actually got a higher than average price, they thought, and all the high quality players actually ended up getting less than they deserved, and they ended up exiting the market. So that market for lemons shows this continuing cycle of punishing high quality and getting them out of the market. And that has been significantly, I think, played out in the data marketplace, especially for high quality panel providers that have invested in what they're doing, because there's been unethical players that have harvested data for free with browser toolbar injectors or things like that. And of course, any panel company is going to look expensive when compared to that type of harvest. So that's a good example of a type of player that has been punished, and we're looking to benefit is, high quality ethical panel providers that you could pull together to model data sets that is not being done now.
Yeah, and even simply looking at the way data is priced in online advertising, there's sort of like two prices, like $1 or $1.50, and there's not a lot of sort of science behind the pricing. And Timur, to your point, that's kind of like the lemon theory, which is just like everyone has sort of settled on a common price. And if you talk to data providers today who have really high quality data, they'll always say, "Oh, I don't sell my data like that because I'm not getting the value from it." Whereas other companies who have low quality are like happy to get all these riches from the perception of quality that they're able to benefit from.
Okay, so we were kind of talking about this pre-COVID time. Let's fast forward to today. Dan, you hinted at this a little bit. I wonder if, obviously most companies are going to be cautious in a time when they're, the economy temporarily freezes, right? And people are just not buying stuff, and they're not sure if they should even advertise at all. They're cautious about taking risks, but at the same time, you're right. There's a tilt toward performance and needing to prove every dollar's effectiveness. What have you guys seen in terms of like are brands more wary than they used to be? Are they, not talking to you guys? They're not taking calls. Like what's the state of things lately?
As of late, certainly there's been a bit of a thaw, and I think everyone is planning, at least in most categories, planning for the reopening and how do they spend, and especially spend some of those budgets that maybe were paused for a bit, so they have some extra spending that they can push into the market. But for a lot of these brands, I think the pause, the COVID pause, actually gave them an ability to turn off some legacy non-performing channels and instead reallocate those budgets to channels that are more measurable and data-driven. Connected TV is a great example. Cord cutting and the rise of connected TV, that was accelerated during the shutdown. And that allows brands to move all these linear dollars, which may be harder to measure, directly into CTV dollars, which are much more measurable. And I think that's going to drive, again, more use of data going forward.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of, should we be doing the upfronts anymore? Does this make sense? And then
right.
It'd be interesting to see whether that pushes the industry to be more data-driven in television.
Exactly.
Timur, you're going to jump in.
I think it's been such a volatile time. It was almost like a knockout punch the first 3 to 4 weeks. And in a sense, I think it has probably what Dan is hearing and I'm hearing too, is that the focus on quality and Dan's services on actual modeling and getting those monetization baseline is more important than ever, because the cost of being wrong for a marketer now has gone up significantly in the last bit. If you acquire the wrong customer now as a marketer, it's very expensive. Think about think about any credit agency or credit product, anything like that. It's bad. And so from that sense, we've actually seen a significant uptick in interest, and we've had a number of folks come to us and say, this is long overdue. What can we do to partner and help you roll this out in a positive way and adjust it, specific areas. And in that sense, I think Dan and I, frankly, have already started referring partners and customers back and forth. So I think this partnership is very organic in the sense that it's happened due to partner and client demand. And there's times that I'm talking to a customer and they're like, well, this is great, but before I don't even have a data business yet, can you help me get estimates on revenue drive? And I'm like, yeah, actually, we're not doing that because we're focused on measurement, but there's a partner over here who's really focused on the monetization angle, and it's been very seamless from that perspective.
On that note, does it worry you at all that, sorry to interrupt you, whether during this period of uncertainty and everyone's kind of being really cautious, that more quote unquote bad guys might try and pull some stuff off while they can, like, with the shadier data guys are going to come out of the woodwork?
That's always a concern. Yeah. And I think, given your background, Mike, on following the market closely, I think that's certainly a concern. And there are potential risks, and there are potential vulnerabilities that aren't being talked about enough. And so, I think for us and with Dan, we want to highlight the good players, but by doing that, we also need to spell out what can happen. Like, what if people are missing things? What are the bad things that can happen? So, like, we've talked about consent frameworks and how important that is, but who is fact checking or actually checking the type of consent that's being used? In terms of testing and looking at the composition of an audience segment. I think the ecosystem now knows to look at the audience composition of inventory, but actually looking at the underlying composition of data. Is it coming from a high quality site? Is it coming from a site that has viable overt consent from its users, etc.? I don't think enough of that is happening, and I'm sure it has ties into monetization. But interestingly, I don't think anyone has really done a study yet on the impact of consent and GDPR type consent or CCPA type consent on performance and monetization. So there's a whole world of exploration that has to be done, and there's definitely a lot of risk if it doesn't happen.
It's interesting you mentioned CCPA, and do you guys think now that we're in this, like, the economic downturn, maybe we're turning the corner on the pandemic, but just a lot of crisis in the world. I wonder if you think consumers are less concerned now that they're all of a sudden maybe thinking, well, we need data to track things like COVID, and I'm not as hesitant to share, and I wonder if regulators are going to be less focused on this right now because there's so many other things going on. It was at one point this was in the presidential race, and now no one's talking about this at all. It's interesting. What do you guys think is going to happen?
Yeah, definitely. COVID raised the awareness, among the population on sort of the value of data and the prevalence of data in sort of our everyday lives. I mean, even COVID itself, every day you turn on the news, the first thing you see is data, number of deaths, number of cases, and there's contact tracing using mobile phone data. And so the awareness of data and some of the societal good that it can bring, I think has actually increased a lot in the last few months. And some of the data products that maybe were only for like these sort of scary marketers can actually, again, drive greater societal value than just targeting ads. But nonetheless, I still think CCPA will continue to exist and be enforced appropriately. And so I think for the marketing use case, I think consumers may be less scared, but I think CCPA is going to provide the standard that the industry can use and reference as a way to protect data, but still drive value from it for marketing purposes.
Yeah, 100% agree. I actually wouldn't have too much to add there. I think I agree on the positive aspects of it, and I'm quite certain that there will be a bit of pushback and kind of a flashback to the concerns about data usage. And my guess is that when I hope the positive use cases play out, but I'm also quite certain, unfortunately, based on experience, that somebody may use that data the wrong way, and it's likely going to be an employer using that tracking information to quietly turn down somebody for a job or set some risk assessment, and that's going to come out in the press, and it's not hard. So it's a really tough balancing act. But I personally go towards the privacy angle and data privacy as being critical, and I think it's of essence to a free and functioning democracy. And so that's my concern.
Timur, what I know this is going to be hard to answer because I imagine there's such a wide range in the continuum for brands. But if you think about the average CMO or even a high-ranking digital advertising executive at a big agency, what is their knowledge of the data marketplace in terms of, like, do they ask the right questions? Do they understand that you should ask about methodology and modeling and do they know what red flags to look for when they're evaluating data? Or is it all over the place? What do you find?
What we find is that there are smart buyers out there, and that buyers want to, they need to hit their performance metrics. Obviously, it's their livelihood, so they care about it and they're passionate about it. Generally, I don't think the tools are available. The tools have not been available. So it really is the buyer has to trust what the data seller is telling them. So I think the way that plays out is that most data buyers have really narrowed down their sources, and other than the big three of Facebook, Google, and Amazon, which are continuing to dominate the ecosystem, and for good reason. I think there is a ton of quality there, but they are expensive on a relative basis. But I think it's making it harder and harder for a CMO to trust new sources, because the onboarding unfortunately has to come with a lot of individual test and control, and every marketer is essentially having to create their own evaluation method. They're having to create their own test, and you know, I don't think that they're going to relinquish that control completely, but I do think that we can make that quite a bit simpler by having a framework that is accepted across the ecosystem.
Yeah, and to Timur's point, like what you might see in a large agency is they may say, okay, we're going to go vet and sign 3 data providers who are going to just sort of be our master service provider of all the data we need. And they do this deep vetting process to ensure compliance and quality and all of that. But what they're missing ultimately is there's dozens of other high quality data providers out there, but they're just not set up to kind of measure and sort of scale the compliance and quality auditing very well. So the agency is missing out on good data, and obviously the data provider is missing out on that agency budget, and then the marketer is missing out on good performing data. And so that should change over time with things that Neutronian's doing.
But on to your point, I imagine what also clouds their decision making in the market is that so many of the big holding companies have made investments in their own giant data provider or data clearinghouse. I'm thinking about Axiom, and there are a couple other really large deals of that scale in the last 6 months. So I wonder if those guys are going to favor their own products, and that's going to make the market tougher to open up. I don't know if either of you guys have a thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly corporate dynamics like that I think can be priced into commercials and things, which makes things challenging. But I think in the end, transparency is going to win, and so companies that have the best data and can surface the quality of that data, marketers are going to demand that, not sort of one-stop shop for lower quality data. And
they want the best data, not just your agency's best data.
Correct.
And I think I agree. Like, the transparency will drive that, and I think you'd have a hard time pointing to $100 billion or $1 trillion markets elsewhere that are not facilitated by a third-party metric or a third-party auditor. You can't imagine the credit markets, financial markets, or even healthcare markets operating without it. But here we find ourselves in the data markets with really no auditor of power where confidential. But so I think the transparency will drive that. But ultimately, what marketers care about too is having a customized fit of their needs, their taxonomy, their understanding of their consumer. And they're not going to get that in today's world, because there is not let alone baseline set of quality and compliance. There's no dialogue around a fit for purpose. There's no dialogue around, well, this data set could be really useful for a CPG or fintech, but probably isn't great for an auto intender. And I think when you have marketers aware that, Harvard Business Review published a study a month and a half ago that noted the average demographic, age and gender segment that they tested was only accurate a little over 42% of the time, which is worse than flipping a coin. That's going to drive the analytics and saying, well, and some of those segments may have actually been really accurate for certain demographics and certain aspects of the population, but if you try and apply them across the entire population, they're going to go back down to actually being less than a coin toss. So all of that ties into performance, and ultimately quality will boost performance, and we're in the early innings of talking about that.
In the grand scheme of things, where we're hoping to go, if the vision is a more transparent market, better quality, and then better results for brands, how big of an issue is the cookie going away in your mind? Is it more noise? Is it a really big problem? Is it something that's yesterday's problem anyway? What do you guys both think?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic that everyone is figuring out, and I think most people do not. I don't think anyone really knows what the answer is. There's solutions that LiveRamp is putting out there with their ID graph alternative. There's browser-based solutions emerging, but I sort of look at that as a sideshow to the use of data. Data will still be used regardless of what the common identifier is, and the third-party cookie is just an identifier that's going away. there'll be something that replaces it in some form, and there'll be some type of data that's associated with it. So the need for data is not going to evaporate with cookies.
Timur, is it Armageddon, or is it just something left over from the desktop era that doesn't matter that much?
Yeah, no, I mean, it could be Armageddon, but one of the things I love about MarTech, as much as it can be a maligned ecosystem, I love it because there's tons of smart people, there's tons of ethical people. I mean, there are some bad actors, but it has the potential to be Armageddon, and we could all be left working for Facebook, Google, and Amazon and concentrated there. But every time the industry has been challenged this way, and I know that even Facebook, Google, and Amazon want to facilitate some alternatives. So I'm confident that it will be answered, and it'll be based on the data usage piece. And I think that agree with Dan that it's the data will be used, and the evolution of first party data and the pending crisis here will open up the idea of sharing first party data in a safe way. And I think there will be the emergence of the mythical first party data consortium at some point in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe sooner. So it's going to be a good driver of change, and I think any crisis will weed out a lot of the noise, and it'll actually drive a true solution to come to bear.
Guys, I want to make sure we're conscious of time here. Dan, I want to make sure I asked you. We keep talking about applying all this stuff to marketing. I imagine everything that we've described here can also be applied to other industries in a big way. Can you maybe talk about where you see some potential for better data clarity in finance, banking, other worlds?
Absolutely. So, the world I come from at LiveRamp and Timur is sort of very much the marketing and advertising world, which is really the tip of the spear for data usage and data liquidity, sales and marketing use cases. And so it's a very, in some ways, mature market in terms of the volume of data getting piped through it. But increasingly, you've got other markets. Healthcare is a huge one, and financial services, where data is being used to help make decisions. So they call it alternative data in the financial community, but helping hedge funds use, for example, location data or transactional data to better understand investment opportunities. Or in healthcare, you've got more and more data being used to understand healthcare outcomes. I mean, we saw all that in the COVID crisis that we had. So the liquidity of data across different markets is only going to increase, and the need for data and the thirst for data is going to be there. And so for companies to expose their data assets, not just in marketing, but they can be available for financial services, for healthcare, and there's going to be lots of ways to create value with data, but then also the need for real sort of quality measurement of that data as well.
Let's maybe wrap on this idea, and I'll ask both of you. If you can project forward in a year, what is your collective end game or vision, if you had one, and where do you think we are? Like, what do you think's headed at? Timur, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, as a seed stage company, it's I don't think I'll be at my end game in a year. I want to make sure that my investors are aware of my roadmap and properly. But I believe that the end game, that the concept of a quality framework, which is takes into account performance and accuracy as key components, but isn't the only thing that's evolved. Which unfortunately, I think the ecosystem has really only focused on performance and not on consumer engagement, et cetera. I think the idea of a quality framework will actually be fairly well accepted, and you'll have it common that marketers will ask for a third-party check, and will use that when building out their strategies and taxonomies. And I would bet that within a year, the question we just touched on around identity will not be solved, but I think it'll be quite a bit more clear. And then the final prediction I'd make, that within a year, the concept of consumer consent and the types of compensation that consumers get for giving consent, not just monetary value, but in terms of application value and usage of certain other data, et cetera, will also be at the forefront. I think that's going to be a very interesting area of evolution in terms of how consumers are incentivized to give consent, and in an ethical, non just driving clicks type of manner. So those would be mine.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. No, I very much agree with Timur on sort of the trends that are going on. I think the continued democratization of monetizing data. So 20 years ago, data was controlled by really a handful of sort of conglomerates that weren't necessarily transparent, and it was a lot harder to really understand the data market. Whereas fast forward a year from now, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of companies who aren't in the business of selling data as their primary business, but they're going to be participating in the data markets, both as buyers and sellers. And tools like what Neutronian is doing is really going to help them feel comfortable about making sure they're getting the right value exchange for their data products.
Everybody's going to be in the data business eventually.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we could probably talk all afternoon, but I figured this is a perfect moment to kind of stop on a hopeful note. But thank you guys so much for a great conversation, and looking forward to talking again down the road.
Thank you, Mike. This was great.
Bye.